Hey everybody! Today I'd like to talk about the different types of bait that I use. And this video in particular is going to talk about the fresh bait, whether that's taco or halalu or akule, oama, shrimp, anything that isn't fake like a lure. I'll do another video later on talking about those types of baits. But to start, I like to bring up taco. I think it's one of the baits most commonly used, especially here on Oahu. I think it's important to know that there's two main types of taco that we use for bait. There's the day taco that I think is the most commonly used, and there's the night taco. The way to tell them apart is the day taco has more of a brown tan color, and the night taco is a distinct bright orange with white dots. A word of caution, both types of taco do bite, but the night taco I found is more aggressive. So be careful, especially if it's alive, with letting it stick to you because they are not afraid to bite you and it's not a great feeling when that happens. So taco, when we use it for bait, I think there's a big difference between using fresh and frozen taco. When you're using frozen taco, it's important to peel the legs. And the reason is, if you don't and cast it into the ocean, you'll notice that the skin blisters and basically swells up and retains water. I'm not exactly sure why that happens, but I do know that I have not caught any fish that I can recall with that frozen skin on. I think the fish are not a fan of eating what looks like a blistered piece of taco. And when I peel my taco leg, I like to start from the skinny side of the leg and peel up towards the fatter part. I've had a much easier time doing it that way rather than peeling from the fat side down. I don't necessarily use a knife to cut it off. I'll just rub that leg in the sand and I'll start peeling from the bottom, that smooth side of the skin, and I'll peel all of that off first, and then I'll turn the leg around and I'll peel off the tentacles second. For me, I found that's the quickest and most efficient way to peel the leg, but everybody has their own methods. Some people just prefer to get a knife and chop all of that skin off, and that works just as well. When it comes to using fresh taco or live taco, I think it's much better to leave the skin on. When the skin is changing color, I've noticed that we have a better response from the fish. And I don't know if it's necessarily the color that attracts them or if it's more the smell of the taco when it's alive and fresh. The difference that I found between night taco and day taco is if you're using night taco, I'll only use a very small strip. And I'm not exactly sure why that is, but when I use a longer strip of the night taco, I don't seem to get as many bites. I'm not sure why that is, but it's definitely something that I've noticed. So for the night taco, I only use maybe about 4 inches of the leg, versus if I'm casting the day taco, I have no problem using 8 to 10 inches of it. And I think it just varies from person to person and their experience, but that's my personal belief on taco. Next, moving on to bait fish like Oama, Halalu, Sardines. I think these are great baits, but they're not always available to use. I know the summer months are the best for Halalu and Oama and even Sardines. And when these fish are running, I definitely believe those are the fish that you want to use for bait. On the mainland, they have a phrase called match the hatch. And what that means is using baits that are readily available and what the predatory fish are feeding on. During the summer months, I believe that Oama, Halalu, and even Sardines is probably the best bait you can get your hands on because that's what all of the fish are fattening themselves up on. When I hook my Halalu or Oama or Sardines, I tend to hook it a little differently than a lot of people. And the reason that I hook my sardines, Halalu or Oama, through the mouth and coming up towards the nose is because I found it keeps the fish live longer, and it's also a nice bony spot, so when you're casting, you're not as likely to cast off your bait. So as an example, let's use this eel here. I would start hooking the fish from the bottom, and I would bring that hook up through the nose, and right on the top of the nose, all of those bait fish have a little bony spot, and by hooking it through there, it's keeping the bait on your hook. It's nice and stable. It's a nice sturdy hookup. But also when you go ahead and cast it, it keeps the fish alive longer, because rather than having the hook in the fish's back where it's making the fish basically drown or sink in the water column, it keeps them upright and it gives them more freedom to move. And I've also noticed that I catch, or hook up more fish by doing it that way. When it comes to using Halalu and Oama, a lot of people think you need to use those fish fresh while they're still alive. I don't necessarily believe that, but I do know if you were to use these fish frozen, you would need to hook it a little bit better, because once the meat is frozen, it becomes more soggy, I would say, and it doesn't hold as well. I've had situations where I'll hook the fish up, the frozen Oama, let's say, and as soon as I cast it, the entire head just rips right off. And that's definitely due to the freezing of it. So when I freeze a fish for bait, I try my best to remember to hook it through the back twice. And that's just so that I have a better hookup. And I also try my best to not cast as hard, because all of those things play a factor when it comes to throwing the bait out. Another common bait that we use frequently, I would say, is aku belly. And this is a bait that's great for catching everything from Oama up to ulua. I like aku belly because it's a sturdier piece of bait. The skin is so tough that once you hook it through once, it's pretty much gonna stay on your hook. The same would go for eel, let's say. A lot of people, when they're casting an eel out, they like to just chop off the head and use that for bait. But what I found works for me is using fillets of the eel. And the reason that I like to use fillets of the eel is because it's lighter and there's less bone weight that I'm casting. And I also think that the eel skin is so sturdy that you're not necessarily going to have a hard time keeping it on the hook. You don't need to cut up a chunk of it, and a piece of fillet, maybe 4 inches long and about 1.5 inches thick, is more than enough. And something like that, you'd be using a bigger hook, probably like a BKN 30. That's something that I've used to catch ulua, or I've just thrown it out just to, see what's out there. And eel is an interesting bait because I've caught some weird things on that. My biggest moi, which is about 4 pounds, bit on a fillet of eel on a BKN 30 hook. I'm not exactly sure why, but I think it's because the eel has a lot of oil. So when you're casting it out there, the scent is being released and it travels through the ocean. And I think that's the reason I've had so much success on eel in particular. I hope that you folks are able to try some of this out, and definitely let me know what your favorite bait is and why you like to use it. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you all next week.